And so as things were progressing, my husband and I sat him down and said, we're going to do this. We're just going to take your guns and keep them at our house for a while. They're yours. We're never going to do anything to them. We're never going to take them away from you permanently. But we would feel much better if you would just let us hold on to these for a while. And his wife helped convince him to do that, and we kept his guns for about 6 months. And then when deer season came along, and he and my husband hunted together already, so he got one of his deer rifles back, and then he was seeking help. And the more my husband spent time with him, the more we all spent time together, we could see he was getting better and he was feeling better. And little by little, he got his guns back, has a storage locker for them, keeps them locked up, and keeps them safe for not just for himself, but his children and now grandchildren, to keep them out of sight and out of temptation for anyone to accidentally or intentionally use them.
Well, thank you. Mike Eschinger, you have shared over some time some interactions as well. These often start over the phone, and you're getting calls from people often in their darkest times. Can you tell us a little bit about what those go like, how you do those, and what you can share with other people about what your experience can help them with?
Yeah, and I teach this a lot. Number one is to be perceptive. So I'll just bring one up from 2 weeks ago, and this is a very regular thing. I have two actively in my message chain right now. But talking to an old soldier who I didn't really know, referred to me, I found out later, about some frustrations with end of career. And read between the lines in that and realize there's a lot more going on than just frustrations. So to keep the conversation moving, and then for me, it's not even uncomfortable anymore, but to get right to asking the question, are you thinking about killing yourself? And when you get to a real answer like that, and we've been trained to understand non-answers too, that have an indication of positivity, then knowing how to intervene and how to do so on a national stage, and it requires a lot of these interconnected people that exist across the nation who are ready to step in and keep someone alive at their darkest time. So,
thank you for that. Mike Sedini, the mission of Walk the Talk America, I talk about that, is to bridge the gap between mental health providers and firearms owners. You also talk to first-time gun owners. Is there a message that you have? Why is it important for gun owners to have a mental health plan, a suicide prevention plan? What do you tell people about that?
Well, what we need to understand is that guns and mental health are not mutually exclusive. They can go hand in hand. And everybody that's watching this, or everyone that's in this room that's a gun owner, knows that when we get a gun, we get it drilled in our head about safety, right? We're some of the safest people on the planet in terms of the knowledge we have. We watch movies and we point out flaws, right? When we see people muzzle flash and no trigger discipline. So safety is like a hallmark. Then the second thing we learn, which we need to know, is what happens in a defensive shooting. You got to understand the law. You got to understand you can't just shoot somebody, even if you're totally in the right, and everything's just going to be roses after that. It's important. But most importantly, it's most likely you'll never use your gun in a defensive shooting situation. You'll most likely use it on yourself. So it's important for us to have a better mental health and suicide prevention plan as part of the plan of gun ownership.
Thank you. Let me just follow up on that. How's the reaction when you tell people that? Are people surprised by that?
The first time I actually told that story was I was speaking at an event full of first-time gun owners, and the people that were throwing the event were along the wall. It was a bunch of firearms instructors and former military and police officers. And I remember looking over as soon as I said that, just to get their approval to see how that went over, because I didn't know if I was going to say something or they would just be like, no. And they were all nodding yes. So overall, when you think about it, suicide is over half of all death by firearm, sometimes 2/3 depending on the year. Like, it just makes sense that if we're going to be prepared and we're going to be vigilant and the way we look at life is, okay, like we stage guns around the house and we're always ready for this scenario. And we think about these scenarios. We should think about the scenario of mental health crisis, that we can get there sometime. It might not be now, it might be in 10 years, or someone in our house might be there. So we'll have to have this plan in place. It's all part of gun ownership.
Thank you. And finally, we have Chuck Lovelace. Chuck is the gun shop owner on the stage, the only one, and also an important gun shop owner in Wisconsin. As we said at the beginning, the gun shop project and the Safe Storage Initiative really starts in Chuck's store, first in Dane County, and now in Park Falls. This is like 6-7 years ago. Chuck, can you tell us, I mean, you're a small shop, but you've learned a lot, and there's some folks in the audience who are in this as well. You were the first in the state. Can you tell us what you've learned over the years of running the project, how it's changed for your shop, and what, I guess start with your experience through the project, what you've learned, if you can go back to 6 years, and what you know now about the project, why it's important.
So when I was approached by Jean, who spoke first today, I was approached and she said, I want to do this program where we educate firearms retailers and their employees on the signs of someone who might be in a potential crisis. And coming from the Army and receiving the mandatory yearly suicide prevention training, and I was blessed to work with some very nice medical units in the military, to include a combat stress control detachment. And so I got to see the suicide prevention programs at work in the military actively. And it hit home with me. I'm like, yes, absolutely. And Gene and I we clicked and became buddies in this, and we started to approach other shops. We didn't have the Safe Storage Initiative right away. We were going off of New Hampshire's gun shop project. And that data is fairly simple to read and understand and see what's available out there. And we were able to take that around to multiple shops in the county. And it's hard to have that conversation when you're a small business owner and tell someone, we want to educate you to see, if somebody's showing signs that they may be in a suicidal crisis, how you can help them by diverting them possibly from the purchase of that firearm and maybe offering them input as to where they could get the help they need. For a small business owner, basically what we're saying is you may have to deny a sale. And that's difficult when you're a small shop, and that may be your only sale of the day. So taking that into perspective, some shops were very open to it immediately. Some shops were very closed-minded about it. But I think once we started getting the whole process out there and people understood that it wasn't a gun control program, that was the big kicker. It took me a while to figure out that term, that it's not about gun control, it's about limiting access to the means of suicide. And people just seem to accept it much, much more. I mean, the VA took off with the program, and they're offering it in 44 stores statewide now. That's huge. That's 44 different places people could take a firearm if they feel they're in a time of crisis. No judgment, no issues. So.
And I think there's some stores that here in Marathon County that are thinking about that, and across the state, so it continues to grow. Thank you for that. Debbie, can I come back to you and talk a little bit about, you have friends who don't own guns, and you have friends who do.
Oh, yeah.
Talk about the conversation, and when you're having these conversations, is the messenger important? In terms of if a non-gun owner is talking to a gun owner, is that different than a gun owner talking to a gun owner about some of these issues? Or how do you think about that?
I kind of liken it to you guys in the military. You want to listen to and talk to someone else that's been in the military. Military talks to military, and you get farther with it. And the same type of thing here. Gun owner talking to gun owner is easier than a non-gun owner talking to a gun owner. In today's atmosphere too, because we are still fighting, I guess, a little bit, I guess you can call it a stigma, that as we're talking about keeping guns safe, you want gun control. No, we don't. I own guns. My family has hunted my whole life. I mean, I don't hunt anymore, because now I get the house to myself while the rest of the family goes. Yes, but the minute you start talking about this, we still fight the stigma. Oh, you're trying to take my guns away. No, this is not what we're here for tonight. This is not what any of us are here for. We want you to keep them safe, just like you keep prescriptions safe. You keep your keys safe. You lock your door when you leave the house. All these things you do to stay safe. We're just saying, do the same thing with your guns to protect yourself and protect others. And having that conversation, gun owner to gun owner, non-gun owner to non-gun owner, it's usually a little bit easier because you're kind of on the same page, and that helps.
Yeah, thank you for that. Mike Eschinger, I was going to ask you, Debbie queued it up there about talking to veterans. What's the conversation like when you hear from a lot of veterans in these interventions, sometimes though not? What's the difference between when you're talking to a veteran, and is that important to have a veteran?
Yeah, I want to start this conversation by saying a lot of the family that will approach me are scared to talk to their veteran. So before I get into the importance of veteran-to-veteran communication, don't be afraid to talk to a veteran. They need you. Like, they need you no matter who you are, whether you've served or not. If you notice something, intervene, build a relationship, have a conversation. That's a really important thing. And sometimes it doesn't happen enough because it's like, gosh, I don't really know what to say. With that said, getting a veteran to a veteran sometimes in crisis is really important. My whole time in law enforcement, I would leverage that on numerous interventions. Just the fact that I had served for so long, I would drop my name and go with my rank. And I'd talk to them service to service, brother, sister, those terms that we use. You experience different things in different professions, but the military is a very, very deep profession that leaves a very deep imprint. And so, yes, finding a veteran contact. If you're providing care for somebody who's in crisis, finding a veteran who has experience in dealing with veterans in crisis can be a very critical piece of the solution. So,
Appreciate that. I was going to ask Chuck Lovelace, you mentioned in our conversation when I came to visit the shop, Mike DeSisti and I came to visit you last, I guess it was in a snowstorm, a spring snowstorm in 2023. You talked a little bit about the collection of veterans and having a gathering place for people particularly who didn't have a place to plug in. You had some ideas of, like, if there was just a place where people could feel seen, where they could feel like belonging. I mean, you talked about that. I wonder about the community that you see around your shop and the need for community around some of the, particularly the men that you're talking about, who are experiencing loneliness and isolation and things of that nature.
So, my shop is located in northern Price County. Price County is a huge place for veterans to retire to because housing is affordable there. So if housing is affordable, then it's a great place for them to go, so they're not fighting that, and they're able to use their retirement. And what I've noticed was, you go out to the different cafes for breakfast, and there's usually 3 or 4 different tables of old guys sitting around talking. And I guess I count as one of those now, too, because I do it occasionally. But they're sitting there talking, and they may not talk about their service. They may not talk about, their experiences. They're just wanting to say, hey, I went fishing here, and this is what I caught. It doesn't have to be necessarily a military conversation. But when veteran talks to veteran, they understand what you've seen. Even if they didn't experience it, they still understand it because of the training that we all go through. And I think that having a place, my big idea was to set up something similar to the VA program Dry Hooch, where they have just a small gathering area with coffee and things like that for veterans to be able to come in and talk if they want to talk, and just have somebody there who's willing to listen. Because northern Wisconsin, especially when the snow is hitting, can become pretty isolationist as far as being able to get around, being able to go places. And as veterans get older, all they're going to do is sit in that living room and watch TV and get grumpier. I've seen it. My dad's 71 years old, and that's happened. But if you've got a place where they can go, and one, know that there's not going to be any judgment for what they're talking about, and two, that the people they're talking to understand where they're coming from, that'll solve oodles of problems.
That's great. Thank you. Mike Sedini, talk a little bit about when you got into this. What was the reception like at the gun shows? I mean, you're an industry insider, like that. You're in the industry, and I'd say insider, you're just from the industry, and you still go to shows. But what was the reception when you started doing this? Were you embraced? Were people skeptical? Did you get? What do people say?
I mean, there are a lot of people that were skeptical, just because, like I said, when I first got in the industry, I used to make this. We used to joke around about like the negative outcomes being like, and I'm going to date myself in here, but like the movie Twister, like it was like you don't talk about the negative outcomes. It was like an F5, right? So you didn't talk about suicide. You didn't talk about anything that could be weaponized against you in the industry. So there was a little bit of a resistance. I will say though, when one of the pilot programs that we had kicked off with Mental Health Americas, we were passing out these bands. And for those of you in the audience, we have the bands out on the counter out there, but they lead to free and anonymous mental health screenings. And this is when I knew I was onto something, because I was literally passing out these bands, and people were like walking by, and they're like, "What is this?" I'm like, "Guns and mental health. It's free and anonymous mental health screenings." And the stories, the people that were stopping, the suicide loss survivors, the gun owners that were talking about their own experiences, like people were like giving me a hug or crying, and I said, okay, like we need this, like we're ready for this. One of the most surprising things was, so the evolution of this band was for me to put the free and anonymous mental health screenings in the boxes of my guns. And at the time I owned an importer. We imported 4 major brands, and I remember going to those manufacturers. One was in Argentina, one was in Slovakia, and I was just like, yeah, I want to put this this card in the box that leads to free and anonymous mental health screenings. And thank God they were from other countries, because I don't think they understood like how I was pushing this line of this could get us in trouble if it's misunderstood by certain organizations in the gun industry. Because a lot of people, like say like the NRA or the NSSF might say like, what are you doing, Mike? Like you're crossing a line that's never been crossed before. And they were like, sure, go ahead. And I remember having a meeting with my team saying, look, I don't know what the reaction of this is going to be from our customers. I don't know if we're going to get in trouble from NSSF. And in hindsight, looking back on it, we didn't get in trouble with anybody. But me saying, look, I want our customers to have access to resources where they can stay mentally healthy so they could be our customer forever. All my manufacturers got it. So anyways, a few months go by, and there was no blowback, no nothing. I didn't get a call from any organization saying, Mike, what are you doing? And it was the opposite. We were getting calls from consumers that were like, hey, I just bought a Bursa, or I just bought a Grand Power, and I saw that you have this free and anonymous mental health screening flyer in the box of your guns, and I just want to thank you. Right? And those stories become anecdotal, but man, like it was really cool to watch my employees share those stories with me when they say, hey, another call came in, right? And I remember at that time I said, okay, I think we've graduated out of the fear thing. Like I'm gonna start approaching other gun companies. And I remember 2 of the first companies I went to go see. One was MKS High Point, because I know those people really well. And then my friend Martin Tuasan, who owns Arms Corps. And I remember I walked up to their booths and I was like, hey, I need you to put this flyer in the box of your guns. And they're like, what is it? I'm like, it's free and anonymous mental health screenings. Don't you want your customer to be healthy? And they both were like, oh yeah, we could do that. That's a great idea. I can't believe no one ever thought about it. And I was literally like, it was that easy? So I kind of, to put a bow on this, I want people to understand that I think the firearms industry has always wanted to help or been ready to help, but we never knew how to fit in. And part of that is our own problem. But the other part of it is, when you're constantly playing the villain in the movie from the outside world, it's real easy to say, like, I am not going to, this is a you problem, you fix it, right? A lot of the people in the firearms industry just didn't know how to fit in. And Walk the Talk America and like the work of like Chuck's doing is showing other people this is how we do it. This is how we fit in, so.
Yeah, no, that's great. I appreciate that. I wanted to also, there's some folks in the audience that I wanted to actually ask some questions of, because there's there is, I think, a real, there's a wealth of information in the room tonight, and so Kristen is coming to get the microphone. But one thing I was going to ask, I'll switch to you again, Debbie. Just talking a little bit about, I think for people who don't, especially who are not in this part of the state or understand our hunting culture and how important it is, can you talk a little bit about, because I think for people who don't own firearms, there's different reasons that people have firearms, but the importance of the hunt in Wisconsin, as somebody who's lived here your whole life, can you talk about that?
I grew up my whole life, my family's always hunted. My father, my brothers, my children, and my husband, of course, my grandfather, both my grandfathers, everybody hunting and being from farm country and growing up farming, we hunted, and it wasn't for the sport, it was for the meat. And especially in rural northern Wisconsin, there's a lot of heritage, there's a lot of tradition. Family tradition is huge when it comes to hunting. Jim Campbell will be speaking a little bit. I'll give a little bit of a preamble on that. He did the education of all three of my sons for hunter safety. And even now, when they're all 30 and above, if he sees them, he warns them. If he ever finds out that they mishandle the firearm, they're going to be answering to him. And so it's been kind of a funny running family joke with all of us. And but he can speak to this too, because he's an avid hunter, and I hope he will. But yeah, hunting in this area, especially rural Wisconsin, especially northern Wisconsin, it's family tradition. It's very ingrained in everybody. And again, it wasn't necessary for sport. It was because this is your food. And it's still very important to a lot of families. My husband looks forward to deer camp every year. And my dad used to look forward to it with my brothers. And then when my kids got old enough to hunt, it was a big to do. And I think you see that in a lot of families, and that's great. And if my sister-in-law wasn't a hunter, came from here from Kansas, wasn't a hunter, but she caught on and she understood it. She's not interested in hunting herself, and that's fine. Like I said, I don't really anymore either, but you understand the tradition behind it, and that helps as well.
Oh, that's beautiful. Thank you. I was going to ask a question of Jim, and Debbie just referenced Jim. So Jim Campbell, retired Marine Corps, 30 years, a lot of things in this area in Marathon County, hunter trainer, firearms instructor, also heads up the honor flight. And Jim, you shared a special story with Natalie and I from Journal Sentinel about a particular honor flight experience with a veteran of World War II and his son, and that conversation. It pertains to mental health, and it pertains to veterans, and I wonder if you'd be willing to share that story with us tonight.
I'm trying to think what story you're talking about.
This is the one where the gentleman went to Washington, D.C., and then came back and had changed his.
Okay, yeah. He was a Vietnam veteran. And it was just maybe 6 flights ago. We're flying our 48th flight on Monday. And this Vietnam veteran, not unlike many who served in Vietnam, came back with post-traumatic stress, which is a form of mental health illness, if you will. And he had to be convinced, it took years to get him to get on the flight. And he went with his son. His son went as his guardian. And it absolutely, totally changed his life. I found out 2 days after the flight. His son came up to one of our board members, or one of our volunteers, I don't remember which, and he was crying. He said, "My dad told me last night that before going on the honor flight, he was thinking about taking his life." The board member just stood there, and it brought tears to her eyes as well. For a program that was started to take a bunch of old guys to see some beautiful memorials, has turned out to be something that many of these men and women have needed for 5 or 6 or 7 decades, and that's closure from horrific experiences that they went through. Something we didn't expect at all. At all. These guys that, and it's World War II, Korea, and Vietnam, but the Vietnam veterans, when they're at the wall and they're having a personal experience with the name that's etched in that black marble, might have been their best friend, might have been their brother. In some cases, it was their entire unit. After that personal experience, when they turn around and look in my eyes again, and it's hard to, if you haven't experienced this, to understand that I watched that individual, that man, change right in front of me. He became a totally different human being, and I could see it in their face. That closure that they haven't had for 50 or 60 or 70 years. And it manifested itself in the fact that the Vietnam vet who lost his entire squad when he was on R&R, 50 years of nightmares. The same nightmare every night for 50 years until April 19th, 2018, the day after the honor flight, hasn't had a nightmare since. Or a World War II nurse who hit the beaches of Normandy as a surgical nurse on June 9th. No idea what that woman went through. 75 years of nightmares. April 28th, 2010, nightmares are gone. So that, we talked about veterans talking to veterans. What this program has turned out to be is opening up conversations with veterans that heretofore weren't talking to anybody. And the number one benefit of the program is when they come home, they start sharing their experiences with their family. And again, it's not all trigger pulling stuff, grenades and machine guns. That's not what it's about. Some of them do that, but it might be just simple stuff. Who was your best friend? What was your nickname? Stuff like this to get the guys talking. And we provide them a workbook to sit down with their family and fill it out to get them talking. There's a Denny's on the south side of town in Cedar Creek. Started with 4 guys 12 years ago. There's been over 650 attend. There's 90 to 110 every single Wednesday morning. And like you were talking about up in Park Falls, they just around shoot the bull. Sometimes it gets into military stuff, but talking about, at our ages, we're talking about our grandchildren. We have 3 World War II vets, 8 or 9 Korea vets, most Vietnam, my generation, and then a lot of post-Vietnam guys. There's a Heroes Cafe in Wisconsin Rapids that includes law enforcement, EMTs, and firefighters. And if you're a veteran and haven't been to Denny's and you're from Wausau, go.
Nice.
It's an awesome experience.
Thanks, Jim.
You asked me to talk about the honor flight.
Yeah, no, that was
Pack a
great.
lunch.
That was fantastic. Thank you so much. I love this thread that we're picking up of what we can do and what people can do to take care of themselves. Chuck Lovelace, talk a little bit about, you talked a little bit about the gathering and stuff like that. Would you be willing to share a little bit about your own personal journey in the area of mental health? What you're comfortable sharing in that area, but you have shared some of that with me in the past.
Wow. Yeah, that's a hard conversation sometimes. And there's, I ended up going to Afghanistan with a medical task force as a non-medical person. But when I was out visiting some of the smaller bases that I supported where we had smaller teams, if they had multiple casualties coming in, I was helping with them because everybody helped. Whether it was driving an ambulance, whether it was holding a bandage down, whether it was just talking to somebody who was scared. And a lot of that comes back over the years. And I've just recently, in the last couple of months, started talking about some of the things that I've seen and experienced with family that I didn't talk about with them. They couldn't understand why, when I came home from Afghanistan, I had a different outlook. When I was in Afghanistan, we did a program called Operation Cover the Children, because we had kids coming into our hospital that were injured by either insurgents or by allied forces, and we took care of them. And there were some pretty horrifically injured children that would come in. And I noticed that they would always leave in like a plain white t-shirt, because we were a military hospital. We didn't have those resources. So I got with some people back here in Wisconsin, and all of a sudden I had big boxes of shoes and socks and clothing showing up, to where we gave out over 500 pairs of shoes to kids. Those memories now are much more to the front of what I think about now, is seeing the kid who was trying to shove his foot into a set of pink sneakers because he wanted them for his little sister. And so he didn't care if they didn't fit him, he wanted those for her. And that's really amazing. But, you know, it took me a while. My kids couldn't understand why the first Christmas back after I was in Afghanistan, I got irritated with their page-long wish list, where they wanted hundreds and hundreds of dollars worth of stuff. And I'm like, I gave a kid a pair of shoes and he started crying. Why don't they understand that they've got it so good? And I held a lot of anger in, and I held a lot of resentment sometimes for how people seem to take so much for granted. And it took me working with a really good therapist, using some medication, to start to understand that and be able to talk more about it. And if you've got a veteran that doesn't want to talk about it, like we said, have a different conversation. And eventually they may open up. And they may start telling you, this is why I do this. Because we have a very large post-war veteran population right now. And, you know, they always talk about the 22-a-day statistic. That's a lot of really good people that are unfortunately not able to get the help that they need. So that's why we start programs like this.
I appreciate that. Thank you for sharing. I wanted to share a comment that actually came to me from somebody who could not be here tonight, but she messaged me. Her name's Bev Weber from Maguanago. And my panelists don't know this question is coming. So it's a little bit of a different question, but I think it's really an interesting one because, well, I'll just read it and tell you, and we can talk about it. So thank you for your work on guns and mental health. This is certainly a topic that needs to find dialogue in our current culture. I hope the May 16th event opens the discussion. I'm speaking as a daughter and sister of gun owners whose safety and family safety have been affected by mental illness, dementia, Alzheimer's disease, and terminal cancer. My dad and brothers were hunters and had various guns for hunting and trap and target shooting. They were very careful with the care and storage of their weapons and ammunition. I think most responsible hunters and gun owners are, as well as law enforcement and military. Fathers teach their sons. Most feel strongly about their rights as gun owners. But when there is illness, whether it is physical or mental, guns become a liability to everybody. Those with illness aren't responsible gun owners anymore. We can't just hope nothing bad happens. Action must be taken. Helping family, friends, and coworkers understand how to take steps to keep guns and those we care about safe will benefit everyone. I was fortunate with the help of my brother. We found Dad's loaded handgun in his bedroom before anything bad happened in his delirium from end-stage cancer. My other brother had mental illness and has mental illness and Alzheimer's. After tough discussions with my brother and his son, we were able to store my brother's guns and ammunition at a safe location. In his paranoia and hallucinations, as the Alzheimer's has progressed, he still searches for bullets. We're thankful that they are gone. Learning how to talk about those challenges and empowering people to act can only help protect everyone. I believe utilizing the camaraderie and trust mentioned in your article is key to helping address the problem. Thank you for listening. So I wonder if somebody on our panel would like to weigh in on that. Mike Eschinger.
I want to start with for responsible gun owners to recognize what their own limits might be. It is a responsibility thing. I'm so glad that those bracelets are going out with weapons. I tell people to try to own this thing myself. I'm pretty stable and I've been through plenty of stuff, so I like to feel like I'm bulletproof. But I love my wife like more than anything in the world. And if my wife was to be taken from me in some unexpected fashion, I'm going to tell you right now, anybody in this audience, come over to my house, help me get safe for a while, okay? Till I feel better. But I feel very passionately on that. And if we can have that conversation about what that means, then when that time comes, it's not like, oh gosh, you're belittling me by taking away my gun. No. We know you're in a rough spot, Mike, right now, and we're going to honor your decision and your choices to keep you safe.
Thanks for that. You know, what you're alluding to is a practice that I think gun owners are very aware of, among gun owners, of the practice of holding guns. This has been alluded to. People who are not gun owners don't know that, actually. Don't know that that happens. There was a study by some researchers out of Harvard who were not aware of this, not gun owners, but that as many as 30% of gun owners, and it's probably more than that,